Welcome back to Sip and Talk. We've got a heavy brew today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter what time zone you're checking in from.
We are diving into a monumental moment in global affairs. Speaking of moments, this is technically episode 471.
And if you missed the memo, tomorrow is episode 470. We are going backwards in time, folks.
We like to keep you on your toes. Tomorrow's dive is fascinating, a concept we originally saved for episode 500, but, you know, the universe demanded we cover it now, so stick around.
It's one of those great thought experiments our listeners love. But speaking of the universe demanding our attention, I mean, the global situation right now is so tense, it's forced me to triple shot my coffee this morning.
Right. And before we jump into the geopolitical powder keg, we really need to take a quick sip and check the essential global financial signals.
We do.
Because the war in Ukraine, the markets, and the future of technology are all kind of converging into one incredibly high-stakes narrative.
Absolutely. The main course today is the war in Ukraine, where we are now just 5 days away from a hard deadline that could reshape European security forever.
Yeah.
We're talking about the rumored Trump administration's 28-point peace plan draft, Russia's aggressive advance on the front line, and the terrible reality facing President Zelensky, who has practically run out of diplomatic cards.
What we are watching unfold is a nation being shoved toward a cliff edge. The Donbass front line is on the brink of collapse. There is a deep artillery famine, and troop morale is reaching a critical breaking point.
And that's the thing. The frontline reality is far more dire than most people in the West realize.
And here is the core pressure point.
Right.
If Zelensky rejects those reported terms before the deadline Thanksgiving, November 27th, the U.S. military and intelligence support will be instantly and completely cut off the very next day, November 28th.
And that's not a reduction. It's the lights out scenario.
Intelligence blackouts, total air defense collapse, a frontline domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
You might think that sounds overly dramatic, but this isn't hyperbole.
No, it's not. This is the calculated worst-case scenario that military experts are now openly discussing.
So today we need to completely unpack this. How far has the battlefield situation truly deteriorated?
What genuine third-way alternatives, if any, remain for Zelensky to avoid total capitulation?
And what happens to Ukraine within days if he refuses to sign?
And crucially, what are the immediate, terrifying ripple effects for European stability and global nuclear order, particularly involving Poland?
Are you ready?
Oh.
This is about recognizing that history isn't just happening somewhere else. It's being written right now, in real time.
Yeah.
Grab that coffee. Today we are tackling 5 days to deadline, Ukraine's war, and Zelensky's final choice.
Let's start with that quick sip.
Yeah.
Before the geopolitics, we have to understand the money supporting the U.S. side of the equation because it reveals a crucial fragility.
Okay, so we're going straight to the core of U.S. economic resilience. Greg Dacko, the chief economist at Parthenon, laid out this really fascinating framework he calls the 8 pillars of U.S. strength. And while these pillars make the economy look robust, he argues the foundation is actually very narrow, a classic K-shaped recovery.
That K-shape is critical. It means success is concentrated right at the top. And the 3 pillars supporting this resilience are, first, affluent consumers.
Right. The wealthy keep spending.
Exactly. That keeps the top half of the economy humming. Second, AI-fueled investment companies just throwing capital at data centers and new tech.
And third,
asset price gains, the wealth effect, where high stock and housing prices make the affluent feel richer, encouraging more spending.
So it's this self-reinforcing, but like you said, highly concentrated loop. Wealthy people drive consumption.
Which incentivizes massive corporate investment.
Which then inflates asset prices, which encourages even more consumption among the wealthy.
Exactly. And to understand the scale of this reliance, I mean, the data shows that approximately 1/3 of the GDP growth in the first half of this year came directly from AI-related investments.
1/3. Wow.
Yeah. We were talking about data center construction, high-end semiconductor purchases, and software R&D. That's why everyone is talking about a single company, NVIDIA, effectively driving the entire market sentiment.
1/3 is an incredible dependency. That immediately puts the spotlight on the fragility of that AI investment pillar.
Well, Dacko cautions that this pillar is, beautiful but brittle. If the market suddenly starts to doubt the future terminal profitability of AI.
If the hype doesn't match the reality.
Precisely. If those productivity gains don't materialize as quickly as promised, asset prices could deflate rapidly. That kills the wealth effect and affluent consumer spending contracts.
I see this as the FOMO, fear of missing out risk. I mean, companies are rushing to spend billions building data centers and buying chips because they are terrified of being left behind.
Yeah.
But how much of this capital is truly allocated to projects that will yield real productivity gains? And how much is just speculative capital misallocation driven by hype?
It's the dot-com bubble revisited, but with servers and GPUs. If we are pouring billions into AI projects that look cool, but only offer marginal real-world productivity increases, then yes, the structural stability of the entire recovery comes into question.
So this isn't just a cyclical downturn risk.
No, it's a structural faith risk.
And this shift in economic dynamics, it fundamentally complicates the Fed's job, right? It moves us away from what used to be a standard demand-driven economy.
Exactly. DACO highlights that we are now dominated by supply-driven dynamics. I mean, think about it. Trade policy, new tariffs, climate change impacts, shifting immigration patterns, and the AI revolution itself.
Those are all major supply shocks.
They are.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. If inflation is primarily caused by demand, too much money chasing too few goods, the Fed raises rates to cool demand.
Right, the standard playbook.
But if inflation is driven by supply-side issues, like a sudden increase in global tariffs, or conversely, a massive positive shock from AI boosting efficiency, hiking rates doesn't necessarily fix it.
Correct. And the good news is that positive supply shocks, like a genuine AI productivity boost, allow the economy to grow output while simultaneously lowering inflation.
The Holy Grail scenario.
It is, but it makes the current policy landscape really murky.
That brings us to the Fed's messaging. New York Fed President John Williams described the current policy as modestly restrictive.
Modestly restrictive. I mean, that phrase suggests they feel rates are only slightly above the neutral range.
Which implies they have room to maneuver lower without being aggressively loose.
That language is what the market clings to. However, the Fed is highly polarized internally. The core disagreements revolve around these critical structural questions. How sticky are those tariffs? Is the slowdown in labor demand structural or cyclical?
And crucially, how close are we really to that unknown neutral rate?
Yeah, that's the big one.
Let's focus on the labor market insight because DACO provided a key nugget here.
The insight is this. Wage growth is slowing faster than expected.
Okay.
And this signals that demand for labor is falling faster than the supply of labor.
That's a strong disinflationary sign. If businesses need fewer workers faster than new workers are entering the market, that reduces wage pressure.
Right. And that gives the Fed breathing room to potentially ease policy later this year or early next year without necessarily crashing the economy into a deep recession.
So even though market expectations like Morgan Stanley forecasting a dovish pause late next year, followed by 3 cuts in 2026, might be ahead of their skis, as they say.
Exactly. The underlying structural shifts do support the potential for easing, provided the AI growth remains robust and the labor market continues to normalize gracefully.
Okay, switching gears to investment specifically. NVIDIA and the geopolitics surrounding the H200 chip. This is the trade-off in plain view.
Yeah, reports indicate that U.S. officials are currently holding preliminary discussions about potentially allowing NVIDIA to sell the more powerful H200 AI chip to China.
And the H200 is a big leap. It's roughly, 1.5 to 2 times better than the currently allowed H20 chip that China can buy.
It is, and for NVIDIA's stock and sales figures, this would be fantastic news. It ensures the world's most valuable company maintains its sky-high trajectory.
But there's always a but.
There is. Analysts caution that this is the classic short-term gain versus long-term strategic loss dilemma. While the sales boost is nice, continuing to restrict only the very bleeding edge of advanced chips just incentivizes China to accelerate its domestic innovation efforts.
The more you restrict them, the more resources they throw at replacing you entirely.
Exactly. It's strategic warfare waged through silicon. You want the revenue, but you fear financing your eventual replacement. This tension is not going away.
And before we leave the finance section, a quick check on the crypto market.
Bitcoin is showing significant weakness, dipping over 3% today, falling below that $80,000 mark. It's currently heading for its worst monthly performance since the collapse of 2022.
Retail sentiment is definitely shaky.
It is, but there's a fascinating capital migration trend happening.
Oh.
Yes. Former crypto miners who already possess massive infrastructure, existing energy contracts, and data center facilities are rapidly converting their operations into AI data center suppliers.
That's a brilliant pivot.
It is. They're using the physical assets originally purchased for the crypto boom to capitalize on the AI investment frenzy. Even when crypto is weak, the gravitational pull of AI capital is just immense.
All right. That was our quick sip. Now we put the mugs down. Because the next topic requires our complete focus. We are shifting into the most dangerous phase of the Ukraine conflict.
This escalation is happening as we speak. While the G20 summit is taking place in South Africa, focusing on themes like unity and sustainability, Washington's actions are actively undermining that message.
It's incredibly hypocritical. You can't talk about global unity while your administration is actively preparing an ultimatum that risks collapsing a major ally and rewarding aggression.
And the real escalation happened this week, around November 19th to 21st, when Ukraine formally crossed several red lines.
The first major step was Ukraine's ballistic strikes on Russian territory. Following U.S. authorization, Kyiv for the first time used U.S.-made ATACMS,
the Army Tactical Missile System,
to hit Russian military targets deep inside Bryansk territory.
And it wasn't just the U.S. system. Ukraine also deployed British-supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles against targets in Kursk.
So this signals a fundamental shift in Washington and London's policy. They're no longer restricting the use of long-range Western missiles to Ukrainian-occupied territory.
Exactly. Ukraine's message is, if you launch missiles safely from your territory, we will bring the war home to you.
The Russian response, however, was shocking and far more significant.
It was. On November 21st, President Putin delivered an emergency televised address confirming that Russia had struck the Yuzhmash missile factory in Dnipro, Ukraine.
But the weapon they used to hit Yuzhmash is what truly matters here.
They used the new Oreshnik, which means hazelnut tree hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile, an IRBM.
And this is a historic, terrifying first. For a few critical reasons, this is not just another missile launch.
That's right.
So why is the IRBM designation so important?
Well, intermediate-range ballistic missiles were the centerpiece of Cold War arms control treaties, specifically the 1987 INF Treaty.
Which is now defunct.
Exactly. That treaty was dismantled because both the U.S. and Russia started testing capabilities in this range. So by introducing the Oreshnik, a system designed specifically to deliver a devastating warhead over medium distances, Russia is signaling the complete death of that arms control paradigm.
And what makes Oreshnik a game-changer technically?
It's hypersonic, making interception virtually impossible with current NATO systems. And crucially, although it carried a conventional warhead in this strike, it is fundamentally a strategic system. It has MRV capability.
Multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle.
Right. This means it can release multiple warheads, each hitting a different target.
So even with a conventional payload, the Oreshnik is essentially a massive, highly visible demonstration of Russia's ability to deliver a nuclear payload quickly and decisively.
It's a warning flare shot directly at NATO.
And Putin followed this up with a highly aggressive verbal warning.
He threatened to attack the military facilities of the countries supplying weapons to Kyiv. That is a direct threat to U.S. air bases in Germany, Polish logistics hubs, and potentially even sites within the UK.
And we also need to loop back to the updated nuclear doctrine he signed earlier this week.
Yes, this is the most dangerous legalistic maneuver. Putin lowered the threshold for nuclear use by defining an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state like Ukraine.
That is supported by a nuclear state like the U.S. or NATO.
As a joint attack.
Let me be clear about the implication. If Ukraine hits Bryansk with a U.S.-supplied ATACMS missile, Putin can now legally argue under his own updated doctrine that this is not just a defensive war against Ukraine,
but a joint military attack executed by the U.S. and Ukraine.
And this theoretically opens the door to a retaliatory response that might involve nuclear weapons or strikes on U.S. bases under the guise of self-defense against a combined threat.
It creates enormous strategic ambiguity and exponentially increases the risk of miscalculation. This confluence of military escalation and nuclear doctrine changes is why the Trump administration is forcing this intervention now to stop the spiral before it spins completely out of control.
Which brings us to the 28-point peace plan. Now, sources close to the negotiation team claim this draft was secretly hammered out between U.S. and Russian negotiators.
And it has been heavily criticized because it reportedly meets almost all Russian demands.
Yeah, it's less a negotiation and more a highly pressurized ultimatum. The core mechanism is the hard deadline, November 27th, 2025.
Thanksgiving Day in the United States.
The symbolism is just heavy. The current U.S. leadership can claim they ended the expensive, bloody foreign war just in time for a major American holiday, fulfilling a key campaign promise regardless of the cost to the ally.
And the stick behind the deadline is massive. Total and immediate cutoff of all U.S. aid, intelligence, and weapons support, beginning November 28th.
Trump made it public that Zelensky must accept something, recognizing Ukraine's lack of military leverage.
Yeah.
Let's detail these devastating terms. First, the irreversible requirement for permanent territorial cession.
Ukraine would be forced to legally and permanently recognize Crimea, as well as the 4 eastern and southern oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, as constituent parts of the Russian Federation.
That's a massive slice of the country, roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory.
It's the industrial heartland. This includes most of Ukraine's key coal and steel production capacity and, critically, all meaningful access to the Sea of Azov, turning Ukraine into a functionally landlocked nation on its southern flank.
Next, the military mutilation clause.
The draft reportedly demands Ukraine reduce its active military size by half, from around 1 million personnel down to under 500,000. By half. Additionally, there would be severe restrictions on the deployment and inventory of heavy weapons, like long-range artillery and tanks. This ensures that even if Russia were to break the treaty in 5 years, Ukraine would lack the physical means to defend itself robustly.
Geopolitically, this is total capitulation.
Ukraine must permanently abandon any aspirations for NATO membership. They must enshrine a status of permanent neutrality in their constitution, effectively removing the possibility of ever gaining the collective security guarantees the U.S. and NATO provide.
Which delivers Putin's primary war aim through a U.S.-mediated process.
Exactly.
Now, the mechanism that guarantees this is followed: the Peace Council oversight.
This is perhaps the most politically aggressive component. The agreement is rumored to include the establishment of a peace council supervised by President Trump himself.
Wow.
This body would have ultimate authority to mediate disputes, interpret the terms, and ensure compliance, meaning the future fate of Ukraine is subject to the political winds in Washington.
It effectively makes Ukraine a U.S.-Russian protectorate, strategically neutered. And finally, the European buffer provision.
The plan suggests that non-U.S. European troops would be deployed to buffer zones like Poland. European allies interpret this as the U.S. strategically retracting its security guarantee from Eastern Europe, offloading the physical risk of border defense onto countries like Poland and shifting U.S. focus elsewhere.
The global reaction to these rumored terms has been explosive. Putin, predictably, offered his full support, calling the plan realistic and viable.
Of course he did. Zelensky, however, spoke cautiously, saying Ukraine faces a difficult choice and that they would demand a dignified peace, refusing to sacrifice their sovereignty or territory.
And the European allies, especially the UK, Poland, and the Baltic states, voiced shock and strong opposition.
Oh, they're furious. They fear this rewards Russia's aggression, sets a dangerous precedent, and validates Moscow's ambitions for expansion into other border states.
And domestically in the U.S., the reaction has been highly polarized. The traditional Republican hawks, like the McConnell faction, criticize it as rewarding Russian aggression.
And Democratic leadership called it outright extortion against an ally. This plan is driving major wedges both internationally and domestically.
So let's get down to brass tacks. Does Zelensky actually have any cards left to play? We must first establish the dire military reality he faces.
He has almost none. The situation is dire, starting with the impending Donbas collapse. Russian forces have aggressively pushed to secure almost all of the Donetsk Oblast.
The last major urban strongholds, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, are now nearly encircled.
Right, and if they fall, the entire eastern defense line disintegrates, allowing Russia to declare effective victory over the key objective of the Donbas region.
And this is directly relevant to the peace plan.
It is. Russia already controls between 85% and 90% of the 4 regions mentioned in the territorial cession clause. The military reality has largely predetermined the political outcome.
Compounding this is the horrific ammo famine. This is the single biggest operational constraint for Ukraine.
The current artillery shell ratio is estimated at a shocking 1 to 10.
1 to 10.
Ukraine is firing 1 shell for every 10 fired by Russia. They're surviving primarily on limited European shell production, which is simply not enough to sustain active, prolonged defense. This ratio makes effective counter-battery fire or offensive actions suicidal.
And the human cost of this prolonged defense has driven troop morale to a critical low.
Soldiers on the front line, already exhausted after years of brutal combat, are now processing the political shock that their most vital backer, the U.S., might abandon them overnight.
I can't even imagine.
This has led to high desertion rates and severe difficulty in recruiting, which ties directly into the plan's requirement for troop reduction, a cold realization of Ukraine's manpower exhaustion.
So he is stuck between two fundamentally unacceptable choices.
Choice 1. Refuse. If he holds the line and rejects the deal on November 27th, the immediate cessation of U.S. support guarantees an accelerated military collapse during the brutal winter months.
Choice 2. Accept. If he signs the terms of surrender, he risks political suicide. He would immediately be branded a traitor by nationalist forces, veterans, and the political opposition. He faces a very real risk of an internal coup or even assassination.
It is the ultimate test of leadership under impossible constraints. But we have to explore the possibility of a third way, a non-surrender alternative, however high risk it may be.
Okay, what does that look like? The most promising yet deeply challenging path is attempting to mobilize a European will coalition.
This strategy requires Zelensky to pivot entirely away from the U.S.-dominated NATO structure and appeal directly to Europe's most hawkish and anti-Russian members, the UK, Poland, the Baltic states, Nordics, and possibly France.
But what practical action can this coalition take that the U.S. couldn't?
The key is deterrence through presence. Zelensky could formally request that Poland or France deploy tripwire military advisors or non-frontline ground troops to safe western Ukraine locations such as Lviv.
That's a huge gamble.
It is. But the presence of just a few hundred UK or French soldiers would drastically raise the stakes for Russia. If Russia continues its deep missile strikes into western Ukraine, they risk hitting and killing NATO service members.
Which could trigger an Article 5 situation or at least a massive escalation.
Exactly. It forces Russia to exercise massive restraint on their bombing runs.
But even if that deters bombing in the West, the challenge remains the logistics. Can this group replace the U.S.?
No. They cannot replicate the U.S.'s vast logistical network, its long-term industrial shell production capacity, or, most importantly, its ISR capabilities.
Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
Right. The European coalition can provide boots and shells, but without the American eyes in the sky, Ukraine is still fighting blind.
Okay, so what's the second, far more extreme alternative?
The asymmetric nuclear edge strategy. This sounds like the last gasp of a desperate state.
Which it is.
It is. This is pure escalation for leverage. Ukraine would focus all its remaining resources on mass drone strikes against Russia's most vital economic assets, its energy export infrastructure, oil processing plants, and critical infrastructure in Moscow.
The goal here is mutually assured economic destruction, forcing Putin back to the table, not for surrender, but for a ceasefire based on punishing economic terms.
Exactly. And the most dangerous sub-option, suggesting or deliberately leaking that Ukraine could rapidly develop a dirty bomb or a rudimentary fission weapon capability.
And this is a direct pressure tactic aimed primarily at Europe, not Russia.
That's right.
Why Europe?
Because the fear of a nuclear-armed, unstable, and desperate Ukraine on the continent's border, regardless of whether it's functional or just a dirty bomb, would be immense. This might pressure the UK, France, and Germany into providing ironclad security guarantees or intervening militarily just to stabilize the situation.
Finally, the political long shot, the Hail Mary pass.
This involves Zelensky bypassing the Trump administration entirely. He could fly to Washington or deliver a massive, globally televised address directly to the American public and Congress before November 27th.
And the pitch would be to frame the 28-point plan as Munich 2.0, an act of appeasement that will only embolden Russia further.
He would appeal to the bipartisan tradition of American interventionism, hoping to incite a congressional rebellion, particularly among traditional Republican hawks, against the president's policy. The chance of success is very low, but it's his only political way out.
Given those limited options, we must now face the worst-case scenario. What happens when the clock hits midnight on November 27th?
This is the chain reaction that military analysts fear, modeled on Ukraine's absolute reliance on U.S. systems.
Wow.
We're looking at a collapse that unfolds within 72 hours to 2 weeks.
The first, most immediate, and most lethal consequence is the intelligence blackout.
The blinding of the Ukrainian military. This is critical. The Ukrainian military's high-value systems, HIMARS, sophisticated air defense like Patriot, and even tactical unit movements, are critically dependent on real-time U.S. satellite data links and reconnaissance feeds from assets like Global Hawk drones.
The moment Washington flips the switch on November 28th, what happens to their systems?
The entire command and control structure goes blind. HIMARS become virtually useless for deep precision strikes because they lose the ability to accurately target Russian troop concentrations.
And the early warning system.
Their early warning system for incoming ballistic missiles drops from approximately 15 minutes. Enough time for Kyiv citizens to get to shelters, to maybe 2 or 3 minutes, relying only on local, easily jammed ground radar.
The second consequence is the air defense paralysis. The sky opens up.
Ukraine's air defense shield relies on interceptor missiles for Patriot and NASAM systems, which are overwhelmingly U.S. supplied. Without U.S. support, no resupply means no reloads.
And Russia will know this immediately. What's their first move?
Russia will launch a massive, synchronized saturation attack using cruise missiles, drones, and ballistics. They will prioritize exhausting the remaining Patriot and NASAM stockpiles, which would be depleted within days.
And by early December?
By early December, the Russian Aerospace Forces, the VKS, achieve complete air supremacy.
Complete air supremacy means the return of massive, non-precision bombardment.
Exactly. Russian bomber squadrons can now operate at low altitude with impunity, deploying heavy FAB-3000 glide bombs 3-ton warheads to carpet bomb frontline positions. Furthermore, they can systematically eliminate critical national infrastructure, plunging major cities like Kyiv into darkness and freezing cold.
And this leads inexorably to the frontline domino effect.
The psychological impact is as damaging as the material loss. When soldiers realize they have been strategically abandoned, large-scale surrenders and unauthorized retreats become inevitable. Command cohesion breaks down.
And Russia will immediately exploit 2 key areas. First, Zaporizhia.
This is the gateway to the Dnipro River. If the southern line collapses due to lack of shells and air cover, Russian forces can punch through the open steppes quickly, threatening to split Ukraine in half.
And second, Kharkiv.
Ukraine's second largest city. Without Patriot and NASAM's defense, Kharkiv will face overwhelming Russian artillery and air power. We would likely see the complete leveling of the city, similar to Mariupol, as Russia tries to secure the northeast border region.
The military consensus is that without U.S. support, the front could shatter within 2 weeks.
That's the assessment.
This is a horrific but realistic military assessment. Now, we must understand why this isn't just a Ukrainian disaster, but a global one.
The outcome of this ultimatum will send seismic shocks across the international order. The first and most immediate repercussion will be the Taiwan effect and broken promises in Asia.
How does Beijing interpret Washington forcing Kyiv to surrender?
This is a devastating strategic signal. China will interpret this as proof that U.S. security commitments are conditional, temporary, and dependent on political cycles. It demonstrates that American patience for long, grinding wars, even those supporting democratic allies, is extremely low.
This directly validates a long-term strategy for Beijing.
It absolutely does. It encourages China to adopt a long-term blockade and forced negotiation strategy against Taiwan. Beijing would gamble that if they impose enough economic pain and drag out a conflict, the U.S. will eventually pressure Taipei to accept compromise for the sake of stability, just as they pressured Kyiv.
And globally, this acceptance of land change by force constitutes the broken window of territorial integrity.
The principle of territorial integrity that borders cannot be changed by force is the bedrock of the post-WWII order. If the U.S., the architect of that order, sanctions Russia's territorial gains, that principle is effectively nullified. It sets a terrifying precedent.
The second colossal impact is the acceleration of nuclear proliferation. This is the ultimate lesson of the Budapest Memorandum, right? Where Ukraine gave up its nukes for security guarantees that proved worthless.
The lesson for every non-nuclear ally is crystal clear. No treaty guarantee is worth the paper it's written on. Only nuclear weapons ensure survival.
And this immediately feeds into the security calculus of America's most exposed allies.
Yeah.
Poland is at the top of that list.
Warsaw will lose all residual faith in the NATO umbrella if Ukraine is sacrificed. They will immediately and aggressively accelerate efforts to join NATO's nuclear sharing program, or if blocked by Washington, launch internal programs for indigenous nuclear development.
And the same discussion will erupt across Asia.
Oh, absolutely. Japan and South Korea, which sit under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, will be forced to ask, if Washington will sacrifice Kyiv, will it sacrifice Seoul or Tokyo to avoid a nuclear exchange? Internal domestic discussions about self-arming and developing independent nuclear deterrence will gain serious political momentum,
risking an Asian nuclear arms race.
Yep.
The third ripple effect is the post-conflict fate of Ukraine, economic colonization.
Peace plans always have a massive commercial layer. The reported clauses go beyond just political neutrality. They are rumored to demand that Ukraine open up the exploitation of its vast mineral resources, lithium, titanium, rare earth metals.
And its fertile agricultural lands.
Right, with preferential access for major U.S. corporations to recoup lend-lease and reconstruction debts.
So Ukraine is militarily neutralized and economically subservient.
Precisely. Ukraine becomes a neutral state on paper, but an economic vassal state, highly controlled by American financial interests. Firms like BlackRock, which are already heavily involved in the reconstruction funds, would essentially govern the nation's economic future.
Finally, the critical danger of internal conflict and civil war.
The threat to Zelensky is internal and existential. Ukraine has hundreds of thousands of combat veterans and powerful, highly motivated nationalist groups, including remnants of units like Azov. If he signs a surrender treaty, they will view it as the ultimate betrayal.
And so what happens next? A coup.
Zelensky risks being immediately overthrown by a domestic coup d'etat. The resulting political vacuum could lead to immediate internal instability, potentially a short-lived but violent civil war, as hardline groups try to establish a resistance government.
So even a negotiated peace might not bring stability.
Not at all. The decision facing Zelensky doesn't lead to a simple, clean ending. It leads to tragedy, chaos, or regional war, no matter which door he chooses.
Since we are discussing European anxiety and the potential U.S. strategic retraction, we have to focus on Poland. They are the only major European country currently acting like they expect the U.S. to leave.
That's right. The question is, can Warsaw step up and replace Washington as the regional security guarantor?
Poland is executing Europe's largest military expansion since World War II. Their strategy, often dubbed the hedgehog strategy, aims to make Poland so militarily dense and capable that Russia would find the cost of invading prohibitively high.
Let's break down their hard power. First, armor dominance. They are building the largest tank force in NATO Europe.
They were on a massive procurement spree, acquiring around 1,000 Korean K2 Black Panther tanks.
1,000.
And 366 U.S. M1A2 Abrams tanks, adding to their existing Leopard 2s. This means they will field more advanced armor than Germany, France, and the UK combined.
Then there's the sheer artillery firepower. They've ordered over 600 K9 self-propelled howitzers from Korea and approximately 500 HIMARS and K239 multiple rocket systems.
This provides superior long-range precision fire capability. It means Poland can potentially dominate the early stages of a conflict by eliminating Russian staging areas far behind the lines.
And their manpower commitment is huge. While most Western European armies are shrinking, Poland plans to expand its standing army to 300,000 personnel, establishing the largest ground force in NATO Europe. This is backed by a fiercely strong national will to resist.
Based on this investment, Poland is positioning itself as the de facto leader of Eastern Europe.
Absolutely. They are the only trusted power among the Baltics, Romania, and the Nordics, who view French and German policy as too soft. Poland is actively trying to revive the intermarium concept, an alliance stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, with Poland as the natural command and logistics hub.
But let's introduce some critical friction. You can buy all the tanks you want, but are there fatal flaws that make the U.S. replacement impossible?
3 major flaws, and they are existential. Number 1, the nuclear vacuum.
No amount of conventional superiority can counter a nuclear threat.
Correct. Russia can use tactical nuclear blackmail against Warsaw. If Poland's conventional army starts marching into Russian-held territory, Russia can threaten to use a tactical nuke on Polish soil. Without the U.S. nuclear umbrella, Poland has no retaliatory capability.
Their hedgehog strategy instantly becomes irrelevant.
It does.
Flaw number 2.
The crippling lack of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
As we discussed in the Ukraine scenario, precision warfare relies on U.S. eyes in the sky.
Right. And while Poland is buying early warning aircraft and satellites, their intelligence capacity is simply inadequate to support high-precision strikes across a vast eastern front. Their 500 HIMARS launchers are far less effective without the U.S. data feed.
And the third flaw is the economic-industrial bottlenecks.
Poland is spending over 4% of its GDP on defense, unprecedented in NATO. But their GDP is still relatively small. A high-intensity war of the scale currently seen in Ukraine would exhaust Poland's industrial capacity within 6 months.
So they need unified European industrial support, but their current political tensions with Brussels and Germany make that level of integration difficult.
Very difficult.
So Poland can be a fortress, capable of inflicting severe damage on Russia in a conventional fight, but it cannot win a full-scale, long-duration war against a nuclear power without the U.S. strategic backup.
Poland knows these limitations, which is why their nuclear pursuit has become a central element of their political discourse. They are pursuing a strategy of borrowing versus building.
The preferred route, repeatedly championed by Polish President Duda, is officially joining NATO's nuclear sharing program.
That would mean deploying U.S. B-61 tactical nuclear gravity bombs on Polish soil, carried by their new F-35 fighter jets. They would become a nuclear host nation.
But this is the path most likely to be blocked by a Trump administration, which would view it as unnecessary provocation of Russia.
Right. So their contingency plan turns to the European powers.
Specifically France.
Yes. President Macron has already proposed a level of Europeanization for the French nuclear deterrent. Poland could offer to fund French maintenance and modernization in exchange for being included under the French vital interests umbrella.
So an attack on Poland would then be framed as an attack on French sovereignty, triggering a potential nuclear response.
That's the idea. And the most extreme, terrifying option, self-development.
The elephant in the room?
It is. Although Poland is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, experts estimate that if the country faced genuine existential collapse, they could develop a crude fission weapon, a highly destructive basic nuclear device, within 2 to 3 years.
The political fallout and sanctions would be catastrophic.
But for Warsaw, survival trumps international norms.
And this existential anxiety directly connects to the most dangerous single point on the planet. The Suwałki Gap.
The Suwałki Gap is the 65 to 100-kilometer stretch of border between Poland and Lithuania. Its strategic importance is difficult to overstate. It's a literal geographic nightmare.
Geographically, it's flanked by the two Russian strategic assets.
To the northwest, you have Russia's heavily armed Kaliningrad exclave. To the southeast, you have Belarus, which is functionally Russian territory for military purposes.
And this narrow gap is the only land link connecting the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, to the rest of NATO Europe.
Cutting it isolates the Baltics completely. Let's walk through the Russian fait accompli scenario. At T-0, Russian forces launch a simultaneous short-range pincer attack from Kaliningrad toward the east and Russian troops in Belarus toward the west. They only need to push 30 to 40 kilometers each to meet and block the main rail and road arteries.
And at T+24 hours, the area denial dome, the A2AD dome, goes up.
Exactly. Kaliningrad is already saturated with S-400 anti-air missile batteries and Iskander tactical missiles. They establish an immediate, dense anti-access bubble covering the entire Suwałki Gap and adjacent Polish airspace. Any NATO aircraft attempting to intervene would have to attack Russian-controlled territory first.
And the final step is the use of nuclear blackmail.
Once the gap is closed and the Baltics are isolated, Putin turns to NATO and says, "The war is over. If you attempt to retake this territory, you will be attacking the Russian Federation, and we reserve the right to respond appropriately."
The threat of nuclear use paralyzes NATO, which is designed to deter attacks, not fight its way back into contested territory under a nuclear cloud.
This shows why Poland's conventional buildup is not enough. The Suwałki Gap tests the very credibility of Article 5 under a nuclear threat.
So Poland needs nuclear capability or an explicit ironclad nuclear commitment to deter Russia from ever testing that gap.
Exactly. They must be able to threaten escalation directly, forcing Russia to conclude that testing the gap is not worth the risk. The rise of Poland is essentially a high-stakes, frantic attempt to buy time and push France and the UK into establishing a credible, unified European defense structure before the American strategic retreat becomes irreversible.
We covered an incredible amount of complexity today, from the structural fragility of the U.S. economy's AI pillars and the dangerous introduction of Russia's Oreshnik IRBM to the immediate existential pressures facing President Zelensky under the Trump administration's hard deadline.
This moment, the next 5 days, is monumental. Zelensky's choice to accept surrender or to refuse, risking catastrophic military collapse, will not only determine the future of millions of Ukrainians, but will fundamentally redefine the global security architecture from Eastern Europe to the Pacific.
As we navigate this incredibly high-stakes environment, we encourage all of you to question the narratives. Every state, every faction has interests and motivations. We aim simply to present the objective facts, the calculated risk assessments, and the geopolitical consequences, striving for a non-biased, comprehensive view.
Knowledge is the best defense against panic and misinformation. Understanding the technical details, like why losing ISR support is more devastating than losing a few tanks, is crucial to understanding the real leverage at play.
Before we wrap up, think about this. If the U.S. willingly forces an ally to cede territory under threat of abandonment, what does that do to the security calculus of every other small, non-nuclear state on Earth? How many security treaties are worth less now than they were last week?
That question, the credibility of security guarantees in a post-Kiev world, is what will drive global defense policy for the next generation. We encourage you to keep mulling that over.
We hope this deep dive has provided you with the context you need. Please remember to subscribe to Sip and Talk so you don't miss our next analysis.
And if you need a breather after all this heavy news, check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. It's a great place to find some fun travel vlogs and memes to lighten the mood.
We'll see you next time.